All right, for our last bit about sampling methods, and we want to question sort of external validity, because how we get our sample has everything to do with now what can we infer is true about everyone else that the sample represents. Now, sampling methods, having a random sample is going to be most important if you're making a frequency claim. Because if you want to say, 32% of college students think X, or 97% of UT students want to keep the Lady Bowls, whatever, you really have to make sure that unless you asked everybody in your population, which never happens, you have to make sure your sample is a great representation of that group that you're making the claim about. And you only do that if you get a good representative sample. If you don't, you're going to have crud, right? So this is real important. Think about political polls. What if you did a convenient sample for political polling? I mean, think about all the polling they do to say who's ahead now even for the primaries and the Democrats and Republicans. What if you did a convenient sample where you just stood in Market Square downtown Knoxville and said, hey, who are you going to vote for? Who are you going to vote for? Well, you'll get some data, but who the heck do those people represent? I mean, if you want a decent poll or political poll or for lots of other things, you're going to need a random sample, a truly representative sample. One of the best examples of this is from 1936, just a classic stats example, is Literary Digest was this magazine, and they ran a poll because they wanted to find out who were people going to vote for president. Now, in 1936, the contenders were, a guy named Alfred Landon, probably never heard of him, he's a Republican, and FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, was running for Democrats. Landon was Republican. Well, this magazine, Literary Digest, sent out 10 million postcards to registered voters and asked them who you're going to vote for. Now, they got the addresses by automobile registrations, phone number, phone records, the numbers of phone calls, and one other place, like club memberships. Okay, so that's how they got people's addresses, mailed all this stuff. They got about 2,300,000 people sending those postcards back. And they overwhelmingly said, we're going to vote for this guy, Landon. Well, it turns out FDR won. And there was a guy named Gallup. Gallup polls. Okay, this guy, whose last name was Gallup, he also ran a poll. And he only asked 50,000 people, not 2,300,000 like Literary Digest. 50,000, which is still a ridiculously huge sample. And according to Gallup's finding, FDR was going to win. Well, it turns out FDR won. And it was because Literary Digest had a biased sample. People that had cars, phones, were members of clubs in 1936, they were rich people. They were well-off people, okay? And they were going to vote Republican. But there were a heck of a lot of other voters who voted for Roosevelt. And he won basically in a landslide. So it's not how many people you have for your data. It's how did you get them? The sampling procedure is way more important. And if you look at table 7.3, it will show you how if you're doing random sampling, representative sampling, as you get up to about 1,000, 1,500, 2,000 people, your data don't get any better. You don't really need to ask any more people because your results are going to be the same within 1 or 2 percentage points. So I mentioned the University of Chicago does this social survey, opinion survey, like every few years. Actually, I think they do it every year. And they randomly sample people from the census. Now they stratify it, so they make sure they have urban and rural populations from across the United States. They make sure they have a good sort of quota almost from heavily populated and less populated areas, and they randomly sample cities, they randomly sample neighborhoods, city blocks. Then they actually send people out to make sure all the addresses are still the same, and they randomly pick an address, and they call that person. And they say, hey, well, they'll mail them a letter, they'll call them, they'll say, hey, we're going to come by and interview you. And they say, oh, no, I don't want to. They say, no, we really need you. And if they absolutely say no, they go to the next randomly sampled person. They only have to get data from 1,500 people, and that is enough to get accurate data on the opinions of all North America or all United States citizens. So it's not a huge sample, but because it was randomly selected, the data are great. And you could, take your data, find your results, and go, okay, we're going to randomly select 1,500 more people. You would find the same stuff within 1 or 2 percentage points. It's pretty amazing. So big sample sizes generally are pretty good, but they max out to where you don't get any better data if you're doing a random sampling procedure. All right, let me see what else I want to tell you guys. So frequency claims, it does matter how your sample was picked. But for association claims and causal claims in particular, convenience sample is fine, because in a causal claim, what you're really interested in is, does this variable cause this variable to change? I just need some people to test that. And what I'm really interested in is, if I control everything else and I randomly assign you to groups, if I manipulate this, will I see a change in my dependent variable? And that's what I'm focused on. That's what I'm interested in. And if I find that, I go, oh, cool. Well, now I do go, okay, so it's true of the 40 people in my study. Who do they represent? Are they just kind of typical college students, or did I get a weird sample? Should I do it with other people now, or should I do it in different situations? But my first priority is to find that causal relationship. So I'm not worried that I randomly selected people off some phone list. It's okay to just say, hey, I need like 30 intro psych students to run my study. Maybe what I'm studying is something that's just so common and universal in people. I just need people. When we run like cognitive experiments, maybe culturally, if you grew up in Papua New Guinea, you think differently than Tennessee college students. But for a lot of things we do, it's probably kind of the same. Or, Tennessee college students kind of represent other United States citizens in a lot of things. So I don't worry so much that you're not this perfect random sample. Convenient samples, absolutely fine. So what you're studying often matters for this. All right, so hopefully you've done it, or do it now. Read the rest of that chapter on sampling. Go ahead, take that quiz over and over. You'll get new questions every time. There are about 24 questions. So, make sure you've seen them all. And that's sampling.